Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here. Today I wanted to talk about a subject that came to mind partly because of a post that a friend of mine had put on Facebook where he was just encouraging people to listen during this time. And he gave this post, which I think was just great, and I'll let you listen to some of it here. But he's coming at it from the perspective of an African American himself, and from someone who has had his own experiences. And as he's witnessing everything taking place right now in the country, he's just encouraging people to really listen to one another.
One of the things that I've been really convicted about is that it feels like we're having a hard time listening to one another. It feels like we're having a hard time listening. Everybody feels how they feel and are very passionate about how they feel. And I got to be honest, I'm pretty passionate about how I feel as well. I am a son, I am a husband, I'm a dad, I'm an African American man that really has in my life experienced a lot of things, a lot of racism that I haven't talked about. I don't talk about it. One of the things that I really want to challenge us around is, can you trust me? For those that know me and have a relationship with me, when I tell you how painful what I see is, and when I tell you how scary what I see is, can you trust me? And I turn the conversation, the question to myself. Can I trust you when there are certain things that are really triggering issues for you in the culture? Can we trust one another to listen to one another, to hear one another? And so my encouragement, particularly if you're a person of faith, but even if you're not, moments like this, moments of chaos, it can be really tempting to try and find answers in the chaos. And what I have found in my life is that there are generally very few answers in chaos. The answers come when we process what we feel. I'm not saying don't feel what you feel. Process what you feel. Deal with it. Face it. But at some point, we got to calm down and listen for an answer in a still, small voice. We got to calm down and listen for an answer in the wind. Just sit down long enough to hear. I think the answers are hidden in the conversation, but the conversation's got to be a still small voice kind of conversation.
So to echo what he's saying there, talking about listening, I would say that it is so important, and one of the hardest things to do when we're in an emotional state is to listen. And yet the most important thing we can do when we're in an emotional state is to listen. And so that's a real tension and difficulty there, is that it's very hard to listen, as you know, when you're in an emotional situation, and yet it's extremely important. I love what Proverbs says in Proverbs 18:13, the one who gives an answer before he listens, this is foolishness and disgrace for him. So why in the world would we give an answer before we've even heard people? And that's because we have our own preconceptions and emotional responses to things. And I was thinking about this, how when it comes to listening, in the world that we live in, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of voices, and there are certain things we don't even want to listen to, right? You've probably seen that, where someone starts talking, you disagree with them, and you just turn it off right away. You don't even want to listen. And that's because of that emotional response that we have. But the Bible's telling us it's very important, and it's actually foolish if you're trying to give answers to things before you've really listened. So listening is so important, and that's really the main point that I wanted to emphasize today, and just give you two examples that really encouraged me of people that are listening during this time. One was a conversation that I saw between a white man and a black man. And they're both people that are well known and have a following. Neither of them, from what I know, are Christians. And so their conversation, if you're sensitive to strong language, you may not even want to listen to the specific conversation. But I was impressed, even though these are non-Christians, from what I know, they're actually having a really productive conversation. I would say they're both problem solvers. And again, I'm not saying I agree with everything that they personally believe, but I actually appreciate that there are two people, non-believers, that are actually talking from different perspectives. And by listening to each other, you can tell they have different perspectives and different background and different personal experiences. But by listening to each other, they're actually able to come up with some really productive ideas as to how to deal with some of the situations that we're facing as a country. So I really appreciated that conversation between that white guy and black guy. And another example of this that really encouraged me was my own brother, who pastors a church in New Jersey called The Bridge. And he sat down for their service this past Sunday with a pastor from his area that is a black man, and they had a great dialogue. And what I love about it is what you really see they're doing is they're just having the opportunity to listen. And especially right now, it's so important that we do listen to people from the black community, because they're the ones who really feel the urgent need to be heard right now. Obviously, with the George Floyd situation, it really just brings up a lot of the turmoil, a lot of the fear, a lot of sense of danger that they feel. And so it's really important to listen during this time. But I think what my friend, going back to him, was saying is we actually need to listen to each other. It's not just one side listening. So I think in an emotional situation, obviously the person who feels the most at risk, the most in danger, the most vulnerable, I think they need to be listened to first and foremost. But we also need to listen to all people, all sides. And another verse that speaks really powerfully is in James 1:19, which says, "Therefore, dear brethren, let everyone be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." Now, I don't know about you, but I think that really speaks to me, because the easy thing to do in an emotional situation is to get angry and to be quick to speak. But we're to be listeners, especially listeners of what God says, but also listeners of one another. And so we have to be reminded of that. That's why James tells us you need to be quick to hear, to listen, because our tendency is to be quick to speak and to respond, and especially to respond in anger. So we really need to take the time to listen, especially in this emotional time that we're in. And I think this applies to a lot of things. It certainly applies to our country's situation right now, everything taking place socially. The temptation is just to respond and say things before we've really even taken the time to listen. That is so important. And by the way, when you listen, someone else is more likely to listen to your perspective. So that certainly applies to our country's situation right now, where there's not enough listening going on with these social things, but also to the people around us in our own lives, just our own immediate situations. You might have people that you're really having a hard time with. And so I encourage you, listen. That's really something we need to be reminded of. It's what God tells us, and it's what we need so much in our culture and in our own lives right now. And I hope we'll all be part of dialogue that is productive and edifying. And of course, we have strong opinions about things, and that's why listening is not just a one-way thing. We really need to all listen to each other. So I really appreciate what my friend said. I hope what I've had to say has been helpful and encouraging. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And as always, thank you for listening to what I have to say from A Frisch Perspective.